Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is now Wednesday, June 3rd. Would you say things have calmed down a little bit? I don't think the momentum has swung in any particular direction, but things have, well, maybe it has. Maybe people are getting fed up with the president's tone-deaf response to things. I don't know. We'll have to check in. I guess we'll check in with the poll that never moves, that's moving just a little bit, to see whether it continues on. I don't know. What's the feeling this morning? Not quite as apocalyptic, I don't think, this morning as it was yesterday. But all right, we'll see what Greg has to say about it when he comes in and rounds things up. And maybe it was just the absence of the reassuring presence of Joan McCarter yesterday that made things seem so tough. They were, I guess you could say, no tougher than they usually are. Just that there were more people saying so. And maybe that's eventually the lesson we end up drawing from this. All right, let's see if we can't get everything in order here and get our feet beneath us. We'll see what Greg has rounded up for us in a few minutes. Daily Coast Radio is live now, we are told reliably, as was always the case, and is again the case today, by Bill from Portland, all the way from up north. How are things going up there? I keep checking in with your squirrels. None of them have coronavirus as far as I can tell. That's still out there, by the way. We seem to have forgotten about that, and perhaps we should take a moment to think about the fact that that's still there and update things. But Daily Coast Radio now being live. Ivanka Anastasia Trump, just got thrown under the bus for Trump's disastrous church invasion stunt. So, Kagro X, me, David Waldman, may be delayed a bit until he can finish laughing. That's true. We'll see what happens. It was a funny moment yesterday. We did find out, did it happen earlier and I forgot to say it? Did we mention it yesterday? I don't know. Anyway, we found out the answer to where must not have found out until after the show yesterday. Where did that Bible come from? We were pondering that yesterday and pondering the possibility that it had been essentially looted from the church. So we have to withdraw that accusation, I think. I don't think that it was looted from the church. It was looted from the White House, where I guess you could get away with saying, since he's the current resident of the White House, it's difficult to lay the charges of looting at their feet. But video has captured where it came from. I did think it was going to be a little bit difficult to get into the church since it was mostly boarded up. But I figure there's got to be a way of ingress and egress from the church somewhere. The question was, did Trump explore long enough to find it, or did he send someone to find it so that they could get a hold of a prayer book for him, or a Bible in this case? And I think I've seen since now photos of him displaying the spine of the book straight on towards the cameras, which had been very carefully positioned, such that it did reveal that the spine said, anyway, Holy Bible. We don't know whether the pages inside were blank or what, but it did seem to be a little bit awkward. Anyway, it was clearly not a Bible he'd been using a great deal. Not like it was dusty or anything, but he's an evil bastard, I guess, and so had he been using the Bible more? Although, what am I saying? We run into plenty of evil bastards who use the Bible all the time. Anyway, real point is that he was seen on video, that longer video clip that's been circulating from C-SPAN. And you know how they are about editing their video. They never do that. I suppose someone else could have done it, but no. It appears on the up and up. A lot of people commented on the weird and awkward carrying of a rather large white purse by Ivanka across the street and to this photo op. We'll get to whether or not it's a photo op in just a second. Another thing I have to get to. And she carried it across the street, and everyone wondered, what are you bringing a purse for? And people commenting, for one thing, it's, you're crossing the street to go to a church for a picture. You don't need anything. And other people saying, obviously she was frightened to death of being mobbed by rioters, so she brought a gigantic white purse. Anyway, as it turns out, she brought the purse, it seems, to carry the Bible. Now, I don't know exactly where they came up with the Bible, but you can see in the video, and I've taken some screenshots of it, she was there at the event. She's standing off to the side. And but at some point, she walks out, and I don't know whether I didn't see her produce the Bible from the bag, but I think that's the only obvious conclusion. She wasn't seen with it in her hand in the walk over, but she very clearly steps up to him as he's distancing himself from everybody else to get a solo shot in front of the church. He was later joined by a group that he had dragged with him for a group shot, but Ivanka walks up, hands him the Bible, goes back, and stands out of the shot, and then he handles the book like normal humans do by twisting it, shaking it a little bit, holding it sort of near his head. Never, even bothers to try to crack it open, but we all saw all of that. Anyway, apparently now it's Ivanka's fault. It's been laid at her feet, although apparently somewhere between her and Hope Hicks, how does she do it? She's back in the mix and all this, and it was very interesting watching this be laid at her feet, almost as though she were being thrown under the bus, as we often say, somebody else's fault for putting this thing together. But it didn't feel like they thought that they were throwing her under the bus. I'll have to read the articles, and I think Greg has something to say on this matter. I saw him tweeting about it earlier, but it was... I found out that they were saying that Ivanka had come up with the idea for this excursion, and that Hope Hicks had somehow she was supposed to be handling the visuals of it. I mean, it was the worst visual in the world. So I don't know why anybody would want to lay claim to that. But they didn't seem to be saying it, although it was being reported by, the New York Times, I guess, which probably means Maggie Haberman, which usually means that it's meant to be read by us like, oh, this thing went badly and it's really this person's fault. But it seemed like it was being presented by the White House like, wasn't this wonderful? This was a huge success, and I credit my daughter Ivanka for the idea, and I don't know what you would call her, Hope Hicks, for putting together the beautiful visuals that were as stunningly wooden as anything I've ever seen. So they seem to be loving it. They couldn't get any Republicans of any measure anywhere on the record about what they thought about it or having even acknowledged having seen it, as the reporters on Capitol Hill asked Republicans on their way into the weekly luncheon. I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't see it. I didn't see anything. And I loved the comment that I guess they dragged the defense secretary at Esper, and they dragged him, and he says, I thought that the president was taking me to see the vandalized bathroom. I guess that they passed on the way across Lafayette Square Park. I was pretty amazing, and honestly, there's that may be the quote of the day, that it's their belief that presidents and cabinet secretaries will frequently spend their time in the middle of global pandemics and nationwide civil unrest with a jaunt to see vandalized bathrooms that are across the street. You can take a picture and send it to me. That's all right. No, I'm the president and you're the Secretary of Defense. We're going in person. That would seem like a good excuse. Well, Greg is here. No reason to keep him waiting. Now look at you typing manifestos at me. I might as well let him speak. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning. I mean, basically they were saying, look, I have to go anyway. Let's go find a bathroom. So they all went together,
That's the way it is.
Because that's what friends do. I'm used to that. You go
It's
out,
like junior high
to
school
dinner
girls.
in the old days before the world changed, when you went out to dinner with people and somebody else would go to the bathroom and they all go.
That's a good idea. I'll go too. And maybe they thought, I'll vandalize a bathroom, or I'll vandalize a church, or something like that, or a Bible.
Well, there's two parts of this. There's lots of parts of this. I mean, the main overall big picture when you step back is this was a photo op that went so wrong, it's now being compared to Mike Dukakis in a helmet.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was certainly that awkward.
It was that bad.
Photo
I mean,
op.
If you want the best writing on it, actually, I have this from the Pundit Roundup, where I forgot to put the link in. I'll have to do that. But Robin Given in the Washington Post, Trump's photo with his loyalists was a vulgar mess, and Ivanka brought a handbag. The president could have opened the Bible. He could have read Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. Federal law enforcement had just fired tear gas at peaceful demonstrators, pelted them with rubber bullets, and chased them away on horseback. Trump now had the secured space to stand in front of cameras in front of a historic church, and he couldn't even be bothered to crack the spine on the holy book. Instead, he corralled members of his staff for a photograph that, in its nightmarish awkwardness, revealed all the ineptitude, cowardliness, and pettiness for which the whole charade was a grotesque cover. I think that pretty much covers it.
I think so. She doesn't seem to note that the Bible came in that giant handbag, but not everybody saw that.
But that was done. So
it's a small
now, having
small
said
detail.
that, let me give you Axios, which was certainly making the rounds last night when they're talking about how this all came to be. And they have this piece here. Not everyone in the White House was thrilled with the church photo op. And these two quotes together. One senior aide was exuberantly telling friends the photograph of him holding a Bible in front of the church that had been attacked by vandals was an iconic moment for the president. And in fact, it was, but not the way he meant. And then the second quote, but a senior White House official told Axios, this is the one that made the rounds more, that when they saw the tear gas clearing the crowd for Trump to walk to the church with his entourage, I've never been more ashamed. I'm really honestly disgusted. I'm sick to my stomach. And they're all celebrating it. They're very, very proud of themselves. Okay?
Yeah.
So the thing that you get from that, of course, is that I'm telling you as a source, don't blame me. But at the same time, there's pretty good evidence that they did feel proud of themselves, at least for a moment, because they made a frickin' campaign video out of the walk.
Yeah, they really thought they did a great thing.
This is a correct quote, okay? And then a few hours later, it falls apart, and so they have the planted piece in the New York Times, probably by Ivanka and Mark Meadows, saying, well, it was Ivanka's idea with Hope Hicks doing the visuals and the Secret Service guy that you never heard of doing the logistics, but forgot to tell the priests that we were coming, and so we had to tear gas them out of the way because it's really important to get that photo up.
Yeah,
and
priests will kick your ass.
I'm just thinking that, like, by the end of today, because things are going so badly, he's being denounced everywhere by anybody who saw it, plus the religious community on top of that. And I'm thinking by the end of the day, it's going to be Mark Meadows' idea.
Maybe. They'll pass it around a little bit.
They can't jettison family. That just doesn't happen. This is a family business. So it's got to be the outsider's fault. And the only outsider, because Hope Hicks is a surrogate daughter, the only outsider here is Meadows.
Yeah. All right. Well, they got to pin it on somebody. I guess they'll explain it by saying, well, that's the person who whispered in her ear about it. And she said, oh, yeah, good idea. And it was poor counsel, and we shouldn't have done it. I did notice, by the way, and I meant to mention, you can't leave Kellyanne Conway out of it because there was evil happening, and she wanted to be a part of it. Yesterday, she spent her time, when people asked about, what about this stupid photo op at the church? And it was interesting. She spent her time denying that it was a photo op, which was kind of amazing, and I guess it has a negative connotation in her mind, but that it was, I guess to her mind, it was a substantive event of some kind, and I wish I had been there to ask the follow-up question. If it wasn't purely a photo op, what did he say while he was there? What did he do while he was there? Because he literally only walked up, held that Bible, had some pictures taken. I believe someone asked him, Mr. President, what are your thoughts right now? And his answer was, my thoughts are, we have a great country. And that was literally all he said. There was no event, nothing was announced. He didn't do anything. He didn't punch anybody or fire any weapons. He just held the book and awkwardly at that and left.
Yeah, somebody asked him if it's his Bible,
left.
And he said, it's a Bible.
It's a Bible.
It's a Bible.
Yeah, that part we got to. That was still astonishing. And by the way, I guess there was also one other question. It was an inaudible question, but the response seemed to indicate that somebody had asked him, well, where did it come from? And he pointed and said, White House. So, I'm sure there's a Bible in the White House somewhere.
Store.
Yeah, right. Hotel.
Bookshelf.
Stole it from my, not even my, stole it from somebody else's hotel. From Steve Wynn's hotel, where they have lots of fake Bibles. I don't know. Yeah, so that somebody scooped it up from a bookshelf in the White House somewhere and threw it in Ivanka's bag and said, that's what we're going to do. And that, by the way, just for the record, everyone knows that Ivanka is complicit in everything, and she usually tries to plant those stories about how she and friends say she and Jared are privately appalled about this thing that now looks terrible. But she did it. I mean, she planned the whole thing. She knew. Esper says he didn't know where he was going. He thought he was going to a vandalized bathroom. She had the book with her. She knew where they were going and what they were going to do because it was her idea. I don't know if it was originally her idea, but she's the one that must have said, Daddy, let's go.
She's the one that had to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, that's right. And so there's no escaping that now. But I love that they credited Hope Hicks for the visuals, and it was the worst visuals I ever saw. Although maybe they were looking for, somebody else did point out, maybe the picture they were really looking for was the one of him striding triumphantly through the.
Well, they did. That's the one they used in their campaign.
That's the one they liked. Yes.
They didn't care about what happened when he got there.
That's true. They ended up finding out those
they
are
just wanted to show that he wasn't trapped in the bunker, you know. And so then the word came out. He said, well, you have to understand Trump was frustrated because people said he was weak and hiding in the bunker, so he had to show he was strong, as if that's somehow exculpatory.
Yeah.
Right, but it wasn't. So it's not playing well. I just tweeted to you this morning's MSN tracker with and without the marker on it to show you what the numbers are because they're big circles and they kind of obscure what we're seeing here. So today he's 37 approve and 60% disapprove.
Okay.
Right, which isn't so good. But when you look at it without the marker, you can see that there's been a downturn in Trump's approval since the weekend. And I say this because there was all sorts of speculation about whether or not this was going to backfire on Democrats because law and order and everybody should be scared.
Right.
We talked about that a little bit on Monday. Mm-hmm. And what I'm saying is there's no evidence for that. In fact, just the contrary. In fact, it even got more clear that that wasn't going to happen, and Democrats aren't cowering, and they're not in a crouching position, as Biden comes out and makes a soul of the nation speech, and Trump's numbers continue to tank. In fact, they've tanked so much. I mean, there's just been some amazing polling in the last couple of days.
Yeah.
Morning Consult poll has Trump approve 41, disapprove 14. Navigator has him at 42.55. Change Research, not a very good poll, 44.56. But in terms of the general election, Biden +7 on Change Research today and yesterday. For the general election, Ipsos has Biden 47, Trump 37. That's a 10-point lead. YouGov has Biden 47, 43, 4-point lead. RMG Research, Biden 46, Trump 39, a 7-point lead. The day before that, what do we have here? Morning Consult, Biden 51, Trump 39. Optimist, Biden 50, Trump 45. With likely voters and with all adults, 45-37, and that's I think a Republican poll. The numbers are just brutal for him. He's losing. It's pretty clear he's losing. He understands he's losing, and it's so stark that even the media understands he's losing. And you see some really remarkable comments. For example, on Twitter. I have this one that our friend Dana Hull sent over. There's a Colorado-based Democratic pollster.
Okay.
And Dana points out that good pollsters are not hyperbolic when they talk about numbers. Okay. This is Andrew Bauman he's referring to. And Andrew Bauman says, folks, I'm telling you right now, I think there's a very real chance Trump and Gardner lose Colorado by 20 points.
Woo. Wow, I've never seen that. I mean, maybe Hawaii.
Gardner
will never lose Hawaii.
The polls will catch up with the moment. But the moment right now is Trump really did go over the edge and lost a lot of the marginal people that he needs in order to stay competitive, not just win.
Yes.
Okay. So, there's other remarkable things going on. That's just the politics of it. The politics of policing have a lot to do with what's going on here. There was a city council member from Minneapolis that was talking about the fact that the Minneapolis cops are basically a protection racket.
Yes.
If you don't get them more money, if you don't vote to support them, or make comments to support them or get them more cops, what happens is they do a slowdown, a blue flu, And so, then people start complaining. You call the police, they don't respond, and the police say, it's not our fault, talk to your councilman.
Yeah. I've been over this phenomenon. I know it happens everywhere. It happened. My dad was a local town councilman for a couple of years and found the same or similar phenomenon in even our leafy suburbs in New Jersey.
So what happens there is, therefore, you step back and you look and say, why is all this looting going on? Where are the cops? And then you look at some of the donations that people make, because FEC donations, you have to list your profession. And it turns out, Trump versus Biden, 70 to 80% of the cops are donating to Trump. Mm-hmm. Fine. That's okay. That's their right. But let's say that they, even more than a military, which is more 50-50, are Trump supporters.
Yeah.
So now you have this going on, and they decide to be a little slow. And then they say, look at what's going on here. And who does that benefit? In other words, is this strictly doing their job, professional policing, or is there a little politics mixed in here? Well, there's been a little politics mixed in here from the entire beginning, and that's why things happen the way they happen.
Yes. Why do things happen?
That's why the protests. And so, what's happening now is that it all gets exposed. So what's the point of all of that? Well, the public looks at this. They hear this. They take all this in. And this is Morning Consult. Most Americans backed the Floyd protests. Respondents were asked whether they supported or opposed the ongoing protests in response to the death of George Floyd and others in the black community, all U.S. adults. 30% strongly support, another 24% somewhat support. Mm-hmm. So that's 54%. Strongly opposed, 14%.
Okay.
All right, independents, 50% support and 20% oppose. Even Republicans. Even Republicans, 17% strongly support, 22% somewhat support the protests.
All right.
That is adults, 25% support, 24% somewhat support, 50% basically support, only 17% strongly oppose. So you're looking at these numbers and saying, well, the protests, and that's what they are, and that's an important point and a thing to call it, these are not riots, these are protests. And the media is calling them protests, and they're labeling them protests. And the way the media covers it is going to determine how the public feels about it. That was part of the research that people were bringing up to say you have to be careful about a backlash. You do if they get labeled riots.
That's true. They have a long way to go, some of these newspapers, and still they've got correctives to deal with. But
sure.
Yes,
I mean, the New York Times are describing the tear gassing of peaceful protesters so Trump could get a photo op as a clash.
Yes. Right.
Between protesters and Capitol Police. And that's another story there. Who are these people?
Right.
A lot of them are Bureau of Prison guards.
Oh, yes.
Who were brought in and militarized. And there's also
clash between
reports.
fist and face.
Yeah. And there's also reports of other groups within these are not militias. This is not Blackwater. This is not Eric Prince's people.
Well, we guess not. Yes.
They're actual people who work for the federal government. And, in fact, when reporters asked who they were, they say, well, we work for the Department of Justice or we work for the federal government. But, they're Bureau of Prison people. And, there's CBP people. And so, again, you have to understand who they are. This is not the D.C. Capitol Police that did this. In fact, they were cut out of the whole exercise.
Yeah. Although there was a very awkward moment for Northern Virginians, in the photos captured of the clearing of the park for Trump's jaunt to the church, you can see that the cops that got used in the street clearing escapade appear to be wearing Arlington County PD.
Yes, and the governor was very unhappy about it and said we're not cooperating with D.C. anymore on
this.
Whereas Maryland said, we'll still give you some people.
Well, that's too bad. Well, that's because Larry Hogan is the governor there.
So now you have a governor who's Republican versus a governor who's Democrat.
I did see...
all of this stuff is getting exposed in terms of what's going on here. The whole issue of militarizing the police gets exposed. In fact, there's actually a story about a bipartisan move to demilitarize the police. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on here. This is big. It's not going to stop. It's more than just the death of George Floyd at this point. And it's in the Gold Coast Republican towns of Connecticut where there are protests. Danbury's protest is going to be today. I mean, this is just growing, and it's way
everywhere.
bigger than just a photo op for Trump in the midst of tear gas holding a Bible right side up or upside down. Either way, it didn't belong to him, and he didn't open it up. So again, it's just, the moment is not being met by Trump. The moment is this Mike Dukakis in a tank picture, and it's just not going well. It's going so poorly, like you pointed out, when Casey Hunt tried to ask senator after senator after senator what they thought of it. I didn't see it. I didn't know. I'm late for lunch. What day is it? Who are you? I mean, the
Where am
the
I?
part that made that so easy to do is because they're not meeting in their usual place. The caucus lunch, I guess, now is in a different building.
Oh.
And you have to go through this choke point where the media can wait there and hit you one by one as you go in, so you have no choice. There's no alternate ways of getting in or out. And Casey Hunt asked everybody who passed, and most of them had just mealy-mouthed, ridiculous stuff, which just tells you that Republican senators just don't want to have any part of this. And if the photo op went so well, how come nobody saw it?
Yeah.
Nobody
exactly.
said, well, the
right.
mission accomplished thing. I don't know. I didn't see it. I wasn't there.
That's Hope Hicks's failure for disseminating the visuals, apparently.
Failure. Everything about this reeks of failure.
Yeah, it was a pretty disastrous. It was a train wreck, to be sure. By the way, I can tell you while your phone is ringing as we get ready for our music, one of the follow-up things, I still have yet to see them finalize this, but in the embarrassment with the Arlington County Police being there, and I guess maybe this goes to the question of how many cops give money to and support Trump, that was supposed to be that they were there under a mutual aid agreement, that if D.C. requested help, Arlington County would show up. D.C. denies ever requesting any help from Arlington County. Somehow, somebody told Arlington County cops, put on riot gear and go to D.C. We have to find out who. That'll be a question at the Arlington board meeting next time. Who told the cops to get ready? So I think somebody's getting in trouble for that. I mean, there should be paperwork somewhere. Once again, you have to check the paperwork.
History has 1,000, victory has 1,000 fathers, defeat is an orphan.
Yes.
I didn't do it. I didn't ask them to go.
Right. Cops don't just throw on their gear and numbers and go out there and then say, gas civilians? Yeah, sure. Give me the gas. All right, let's go. It was pretty embarrassing.
Here's another one from Daily Kos. This is the Black Lives Matter movement increasing support by 5 points just last week alone.
Okay. Who's handling their visuals?
Daily Kos?
I don't know. No, Black Lives Matter.
That's
how do they manage a 5-point bump? So who's a genius? Who's the Brad Parscale of BLM? There isn't one.
They lost Pat Robertson.
Do what
Pat
they
Robertson thought it was bad.
Yeah.
That's how bad it was.
I guess, stop clock thing for him. He's right.
All right, I got that Minneapolis city councilman complaining thing.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. I guess we're all set for our next segment. Yeah, did you? I've got that thread we were talking about, the Minneapolis is he city council? Is that what was that? Who was talking about what happens with
Minneapolis city council?
Okay, we'll be able to share that with everybody. I've got a couple of those tucked away myself, and some comments on that for later. But were you just filing that for our purposes of sharing it later?
It's
or did you
a
want to go
quick
back
little
to that?
thread,
Okay.
which I think is just correlates and backs up what I was talking about here. I want to go back to some of the polling, though, because, for example, the daily tracker from Civics that Daily Kos uses notes a 5-point increase in support for Black Lives Matter over the past week.
Okay.
And with Monmouth, 57% in Monmouth polls say police officers more likely to use excessive force if the culprit is black. 4 years ago, the number was 34.
Oh, think so. Yes, I see. Yeah, I mean, they were always doing it, but yeah, more people now recognize
more people get it.
Yes.
Right?
Good, yes. Well, video and all.
Okay. Morning Consult national poll in Trump's handling of protest. All adults, 20% say excellent or good. Trump handled it well. 54% fair to poor. But that's not as interesting as some of the subgroups here. Age 18 to 34, 16% say Trump handled it well, 57% for. Age 65 plus, 28% well, 50% poor. Remember, the age 65 plus is a big part of who Trump aims his cultural ammunition at in terms of culture war. And they've turned on him and said, you're doing a bad job. Independents, 11 to 53. Good versus bad handling of this. Whites, 2150.
Okay.
Evangelical Christians, which includes both white and black, 2743. Suburban women, 1558. These are just brutal numbers.
Yes, and brutal people.
Non-college whites, 2245.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody thinks Trump is doing a good job on this. It's incredible.
Even Ivanka. Somehow.
Well,
I don't know.
She wasn't told.
No, but her friends spoke.
But somebody thought this is great. We're going to make a campaign commercial out of this when everybody hates what you did.
Yep. Eesh. I just I'm also seeing out of the corner of my eye photos, more and more photos of people who showing us the aftermath of getting hit by rubber bullets, quote unquote rubber bullets. Particularly, a lot of people being hit in the head with these things. It's an interesting thing the way they are aiming their weaponry.
Yeah, well, it's been pretty bad. So Monmouth said most Americans say the anger about black deaths at the hands of police officers that led to recent protests is fully justified, even if they do not feel the same about the actual actions. In other poll findings, the incumbent president's overall job rating continues on a downward trend since hitting a high point 3 months ago. Trump's performance now earns a 42% approve, 54% disapprove. So the point I'm trying to make is that's actually being reflected in the Biden-Trump split as well. And when you're up 8 to 10 points, the Electoral College doesn't matter in the sense that it's going to follow. You don't get to be 10 points up and yet the battlegrounds are split. Right? If you're more than 5 or 6 points ahead, the battlegrounds are going to follow. Said G. Elliott Morris points out, calling attention to the unrest your presidency has generated is probably not the best strategy. The entire concept of a silent majority, which is what Trump keeps tweeting, is that there's a block of voters waiting to vote out the incumbent come November. But then again, that's the likely outcome right now. So
there is maybe a silent majority, but
it's
not
just
that silent.
Anti-Trump. He is the incumbent. This is not 1968, and you just can't say that often enough.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's amazing. Let me see. I meant to look up the see if I can find that one tweet where somebody had taken photos of what they call rubber bullets and what they looked like when you.
Oh, they do. They do damage. There's no question about it.
But there was a great. there it is. Ashton Irwin. Who's Ashton Irwin? He's got a blue check mark. He must be. It won't tell me. But has displayed in the hands the so-called rubber bullets, and he's laid them out in the hand. They're long enough that they cross the entirety of his palm and fingers, and in some cases extend a few inches past. You wouldn't believe what they look like, and thinking about getting hit by them, you get the sense of why all this damage, where all the damage comes from.
Did Representative Steve King from Iowa weigh in on any of this?
Not yet.
I guess that now that he's lost his primary last night,
I
he's
forgot
free
to
to
announce
speak
that.
his mind instead of having to, cut it off for the cameras.
Cut off his mind. Yes. All right. He should do that. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard anything about it since.
I want to hear him unfiltered.
Heard he lost, and that was like the end of what I needed to know about Steve King for the day.
Right. Kevin Kruse has a really nice piece in the Washington Post. I led off the pundit roundup with it called "Law and Order Won't Help Trump Win a Re-Election. A challenger can call for law and order, but the message falls flat from an incumbent." And then goes on, as many people have, including me, saying, "Hey, this isn't 1968. I was there in 1968. This is not 1968."
Aha.
Reuters. Most Americans sympathize with protests, disapprove of Trump's response. Okay. Reuters has Biden up 47-37, and Americans disapprove of how Trump's handling the Floyd protest 55-33. Okay.
Yeah, he sucks. Okay.
So, I mean, there's a lot going on here, but it's just going to be one of those things where you look around and say, this was really a turning point. Probably my favorite tweet of all yesterday was my conservative friend Philip Klein.
Oh.
He had a picture. I have this in the pundit roundup. He had a picture of Trump holding up the Bible in that photo op,
that picture.
and his caption is, "It's a cookbook."
It's in here. I didn't see that one. I saw the photo.
That's from the very famous episode, I guess it was Twilight Zone, of To Serve Man.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's a slightly different photo, and where he's in action saying something, speaking, and he's, purses his lips. So it's very easy to believe he's actually saying it's a cookbook, because that's what his mouth always looks like.
Conservative David Drucker, writing in the Washington Examiner, the problem, of course, is Trump. Republicans worry president will squander opportunity to calm nation amid unrest. In interviews Monday, more than half a dozen veteran Republican strategists told the Washington Examiner that the bloody destructive riots that erupted from coast to coast over the weekend could push voters into Trump's arms.
They could.
And responding to the social conflagration, primarily with a staccato politically charged tweets while picking fights with Democratic governors and mayors, Republicans fear Trump has reinforced the long-held notion among persuadable voters in the suburbs that he is part of the problem. In doing so, they say the president is on the verge of squandering a major opportunity to outflank Biden on a key issue. Not on the verge, he's already done it.
Yeah. Remember, he didn't pay taxes because we would have squandered them. Squander is a favorite of his.
Exactly. In fact, George W. Bush was moved to put out a statement basically calling for peace and tranquility.
Sure, why not?
And Religion News notes Trump's Bible walk to church was an act of sacrilege, says former Bush advisor, that being Mike Gerson.
Okay, sacrilege. Sure.
Okay. Also, other news that you may have missed because all this is going on is that North Carolina said you can't have your own rules about a convention. You have to follow public health rules. And Trump said, okay, we won't have it there.
Oh, yes. He's been sort of threatening that for a little while.
Yeah, but North Carolina isn't budging. And they're saying we're not going to do it if it's not safe. So he pouted and took his ball and went home. Okay. And the question now is where it's going to be. Tennessee, Florida. I mean, he could find a Republican governor. He's got to find a Republican governor with a Republican mayor.
Moscow.
To allow something like this to happen. And these things usually take a year to plan. Now, the good news for the Republicans is that because of the pandemic, there's a lot of empty space.
Yeah, that's true.
People aren't having conventions.
Right.
And I pointed out it's not just the space, it's also the vendors. And somebody else pointed out, they're hungry for work. Well, that's true, too, but they don't necessarily have staff anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, the logistics of doing this in a couple of months are amazing.
Yeah, it's a very difficult thing to do. And in fact, it's a full-time job, and people, just stay, the core planning staff just stay on sometimes from convention to convention. You finish one, and the next one isn't for 4 years, but you start already on getting this stuff lined up. But yeah, it's on-the-ground operations. All of the things that make it run, like so that the delegates can have their coffee and their rooms cleaned and can pick up a hot dog at the stadium or whatever, go to the concession stands. It's going to be difficult to find staff in this difficult, challenging time. Now more than ever, you can refuse to serve a hot dog to Republicans.
Right. So that's basically what I have to tell you. A whole lot went on, but that's basically the summary of it all. The idea that Trump somehow is winning with this, or that we have to be worried about how this is going to play.
He may be tired of winning, so maybe he's taking a break from it.
The whole thing went pretty badly, and the more pressure he's under, the worse he does. And if people like Hope Hicks and Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner are running his reelection campaign, well, we'll talk more tomorrow.
Okay. There's some interesting reports coming in from around the country, too, about, I don't know, there seems to be a lot of investment by the authorities in getting, I guess they're still after the visuals that they want. But it's been pretty interesting, including a tweet here from somebody verifying it, they say, as having seen it with their own eyes. But this is an interesting heads up to L.A. protesters. Well, they say pigs, but we know what they mean by that, cops. But apparently they believe that they're leaving out pallets of spray paint. Yeah, like leave them out and put them here, like unguarded, and then they wait around the corner, and then if anybody comes and takes the spray paint, it's assumed
and bricks.
One
they've done
stealing.
the same thing with
yes.
bricks.
Mm-hmm. I've seen that. I saw a video the other day of yesterday, I guess less organized, where, some of the white suburban kids about whom everyone seems to be complaining, driving through an area where protests were going on, driving their parents' Mercedes, by the way, because they're anarchists and reject the system and everything, driving their parents' Mercedes through downtown, handing out bricks to people in the hopes, those guys, I guess, were supposed to think in the hopes that somebody else will do the vandalizing that they wish they were doing because they're such anarchists and all. But a great video of a woman flagging down the car, and they roll down the window, like, yes, can I help you? And she just screams at him and reams him out. What are you doing handing out bricks to black men in the middle of a protest? You know what's going to happen to people, even if they just lay them on the street and get rid of them. If there's a photo taken of a black man with a brick in his hand in the middle of all this, what are you doing? You're an idiot. Get out of here. And he tosses the brick back in there, and they kick them out of the city, I guess, and they take off, or maybe they go looking for other people. But it's been really amazing. Also, the video of the black bloc anarchist who was breaking up pavement and curb stones for people. He thought he was helping people out. You can throw all these things at cops. And the rest of the protesters grabbed him and dragged him over to the police line and threw him in there and said, take him away. Some really amazing phenomena getting caught on video out there.
Right. Video changes everything.
Yeah.
I mean, this stuff has always been going on, but now it's on video.
Yeah.
Mark Murray points out on Fox News this morning, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine was asked if his state would host a GOP convention. His answer, mass gathering inside is frankly the thing that would scare me the most simply about the spread of the virus. The virus is still very much here. No, it's not happening in Ohio.
All right. Well, keep looking around. They can't fit them all at Doral or Mar-a-Lago.
I also should mention one person has resigned from the White House.
Oh.
It was a
Butler?
Undersecretary of Defense, I think, who named Miller, who resigned because Esper was associated with that walkover for the photo op.
Okay.
And blasted Esper in a Washington Post editorial and said, you really should be having nothing to do with this. The military doesn't belong here. Well, and, of course, that's when Esper said, well, I was just going to the bathroom.
I didn't know. I
didn't know.
Yeah. Okay, so Miller goes back. Nah, probably not. Okay, he's gone. I don't know if that's a...
Well, I asked the question, why haven't more people resigned? And everybody's saying, what, are you new to Twitter or what?
Yeah. Right. Why does this... Yeah, God save us from why does this surprise you, Twitter? But, okay. He won't. So, and neither will she, just to satisfy everyone. We can talk about them in multiples if you wish. But yeah, it's a problem everywhere. Everybody thinks they're the first ones to discover that something's wrong with the world. But
right. Well, things are going so bad that Donald Trump is now tweeting about Joe Biden and his crime bill.
Oh. Because
I've done more for black Americans than any president in U.S. history.
Yeah. That's one of their favorites, and they were doing it just prior to all of this, when they thought they had him on the ropes over his radio interview. The Trump campaign couldn't get enough
a lot of things
pro-black.
Not to be true.
Yeah, right. Well, some of them are true. They just turn out to be being used very cynically. And then, of course, so if you say, well, what about, you can't vote for Joe Biden, vote for me. Look what he said about black people on this radio show. P.S. I'm going to bash your head in based on the color of your skin and revel in it so that white Americans rally to my side after I hold the Bible up outside of the church. Yeah, people can read that pretty well.
Yep.
Good for all of you, no matter what color, reading that correctly. Okay.
So, as I say, that's it.
Okay.
Bye.
That's all there is happening.
That's all it is.
Yeah, I would ask you, how about them Mets, but they're not playing. And maybe they will shortly. They're still working diligently at trying to reopen professional sports, which I guess they'd better do, because eventually people will realize they don't really miss them all that much after all, after a long period of longing and pining for them. I don't hear a lot of people talking about that just yet, but maybe. And of course, now if they reopen the professional sports leagues, there's going to be people taking knees, and you can't have that.
Gee, that seemed like a good idea in retrospect, didn't it?
Yeah. Last week you were saying it had to happen, and now you don't want it anymore. That's weird. Yeah.
All righty. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right. Very good. Let's do that. It's a plan. I will gas everybody in between you and me to make it happen. That's what I learned from the president. Okay. Yes, let me go back to what Greg had mentioned, the thread from Steve Fletcher, Minneapolis, Ward 3, and that's actually how he goes right on Twitter, but he abbreviates everything. MPLS, Minneapolis, believe it or not. It looks like Maples to me, but, if you're from the area, you certainly recognize it. MPLS, Ward 3, number 3. That's the ward he represents, I guess, on the, what do they call it? The council? We'll perhaps find out. Anyway, part of his thread, and he's got a very long thread, and it's not huge, but this was the part that I focused on myself here, that Greg has from Stephen Wolfe and his pickup on it, one of the Daily Kos elections writers. I picked up on it, I don't know where along the line, but I kept tweeting it out. I tweeted it out twice just to say this is really important in terms of understanding how it is that even politicians we love to think of as allies, even allies in this particular fight about policing, can very often, most often, disappoint us in that fight. You will have noticed, I'm sure, over the last couple of days, first the actions and then the expressions of disappointment in the actions, and that's putting it very lightly, of, say, Mayor de Blasio, who increasingly people are shying away from thinking of him as an ally for various reasons, and it's probably a good idea. And you're not stuck with him. If you ever thought you were a big supporter, you can back away. You can lose trust in him. That's fine. Don't worry about that. That bothers a lot of people about politics, that if you express support for somebody at one point, that you're stuck with everything that they do. And people, particularly on Twitter, where people love to take shots, like, what about this one thing in 1982 that he said that was bad? The answer is that was bad, and I reject that. And that's him, not me, and I support that person, or I might vote for them on balance, regardless of what they did in 1982. Because of the totality of circumstances. But yes, I feel bad about it, and I reject that portion of that person's history, and I hope that it will not be repeated and that it will be atoned for. But none of you have to feel like you're stuck with the people forever. It's an important point. People don't actually always understand that. But anyway, how do people who are people you'd like to think of as allies, Democratic mayors and governors and council members and members of Congress everywhere, I see a lot of it, and it's part of the cottage industry that you see very often displayed on Twitter and elsewhere, that there's no difference between the parties, or that we have to tear it all down because Democrats are no help in any of this anyway. Well, how does it come to be the case that people who professed these certain sympathies so often fail to make progress in the fight against an out-of-control police department, if you happen to have one locally, or if they're all out of control, if that's what you believe, or police brutality or abuse in any of its forms. And the answer is they have a very fine-tuned mechanism for making sure that it continues to happen. So let's see. Maybe the thing to do, I could read you that portion of the thread, which is most important, but it's interesting to see what the setup is. And let me give you some idea of what the full setup is, because there's a bit of a national story from out of Minneapolis that's that it's important to, and not just, you know, the general concept of how does this happen to Democratic politicians, but the larger question of how what happened in Minneapolis happens to police departments. So maybe we'll give you the full thing here. Steve Fletcher begins this thread this way. Bob Kroll's letter yesterday to the Minneapolis Police Federation membership is the subject at hand. Bob Kroll is the head of, I guess, the Minneapolis Police Union, for lack of a better word. They sometimes will actually even call it a union. It's not exactly a union usually in most places. A policeman's association of some kind. But, you know, you run into the police, they're referred to as unions, and they act like unions, but we need to find a different word to distinguish between them. But anyway, Bob Kroll's letter yesterday to the Minneapolis Police Federation, membership, showed us what rank-and-file officers voted for in their leadership, and it is yet another sign that the department is irredeemably beyond reform. Interesting, right? And we've seen this sort of phenomenon. We see this all the time in New York, for instance. And so it helps explain some, and we'll get to the rest of it. It helps explain some of what de Blasio is saying. He ran as a very liberal, very progressive, or was presenting himself as a liberal, progressive Democrat. How could it be that he fails to take the right side then in this confrontation with the police? They have, like in Minneapolis, a rabid police union leadership that is just out of its mind and loves the hyperbole and will go absolutely nuclear on anybody, even when they're helping them. Another group of people who won't take yes for an answer, even if the mayor takes his side. And that's one of the big criticisms of some of these mayors, including de Blasio, that even if he mollifies the police, they're still going to say he's a scumbag, bleeding heart liberal, and we hate his guts, and he hates cops. Of course he hates cops. Cops are eminently despicable people on the political level in which he has to deal with them. And it's difficult to get over because it's real and it's there. And Steve Fletcher knows it. So here he says, a reminder that Bob Kroll's letter shows us what the rank and file officers, who I guess are supporting Trump and donating to him at a rate of 70%, actually want in their leadership. And the next tweet here says, I don't want to focus too much on Bob Kroll because he's a symptom of a much deeper problem in the Minneapolis Police Department, but it's worth saying that he's a malignant presence in our city and should resign. After watching MPD, Minneapolis Police Department, after watching MPD officers escalate and provoke anger all week, he asserts that if they'd only been allowed to use more violence, they could have put a stop to demonstrations. This is nonsense. MPD officers have nonetheless chosen him as their leader. And I guess the theory there is, well, if we could just kill anyone who would dare protest, then we wouldn't have so many protests going on and therefore less opportunity for violence for my officers is what he actually meant. But he meant for us to believe that he meant violence on the part of the protesters, which generally speaking isn't happening. After we've spent the week expressing mourning and outrage at Derek Chauvin's, how does he say it like with an accent? Chauvin, but Derek Chauvin. And does he say Chauvin's or does he say Chauvins or what? I don't even know. Who cares how he pronounces his name? I hope it's wrong. That idiot officer who killed George Floyd. Anyway, after we've spent the week expressing mourning and outrage at Chauvin's violence and his fellow ex-officers' apathy, Kroll imagines he could sway our feelings by smearing George Floyd's reputation. This is despicable MPD officers chose him as their leader. I want to be clear. I am about as pro-union as a person can be. The Police Federation should not be thought of as a union. Hey, that's a good point. They do not affiliate with the AFL-CIO, and many, though, do and should be disaffiliated on the part of the AFL-CIO. They should kick them out. They don't walk picket lines in solidarity. How do I know? Because I do, and I've never seen them on a line, not once. And generally speaking, the police end up lining up on the opposite side of those picket lines and making trouble for them. Anyway, instead, they distort hard-earned labor laws to defend indefensible behaviors. And that's a good point. The city recently lost an arbitration after Chief Arredondo, I guess is his name, the chief, fired a cop for beating someone while in handcuffs. The person was in handcuffs. If the cop beat him while he was in handcuffs, that would be unusual. But he fired the cop for beating a person that they had in handcuffs. Kroll, on behalf of the rank-and-file MPD, pressed the case and won that officer's job back. I'm very glad that former city leaders like Chief Harto, it's Harteau, Chief Harto and Mayor Ryback spoke up yesterday because it's important for people to know that this has been going on for a long time. So former police chiefs and former mayors speaking up about this stuff. Now, why hasn't it all been fixed, right? Because the crisis we're in this week has been an implied threat hanging over the city during union negotiations, discipline proceedings, and budget hearings for years. I'll pause here because our break is about to come up, and then we want to just kind of focus on the second half of this tweet thread. It was the second half that I retweeted along with recounting something I've told you about, I think, on the show before, my own observations from when my dad was a local town councilman in our relatively small, leafy New Jersey suburb. And that story, I guess I can maybe fit in between now and the end of our break music, which is almost here. But I can verify the nature of the story that he passes on here just by saying, well, maybe without giving too much of it away. For those of you who are new-ish or may have forgotten the story, I'll retell it. But it was obvious. It became obvious to me at some distance. I was away in college for most of my dad's relatively brief elected political career in our town. But it was appalling hearing the stories and how the things that were done and said by police because he dared to speak up and say, sometimes the police don't actually tell the truth about what happened when there's an incident and you call them in and you try to get police accountability for bad behavior. You don't always get the truth out of these people. Now, he's been a criminal defense attorney for a long time. He knows you don't always get the truth. And they pretended to be appalled. I'll tell you about it after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And let's see. Are we ready to roll here now? I've got some more interesting stuff here. Oh, look at that. Okay. No show tomorrow. Is that the case? I just got this note here from Greg. He said he would be here tomorrow, and now we find out he's a liar. And we'll have to explain. This is like when your 5-year-old says, you lied. You said you were going to give me ice cream, and you say you didn't finish your dinner. I told you had to do that. You're a liar. Tomorrow, this is a good step forward. Installing a whole house generator. And ironically, the power will be off while they're installing the generator. I mean, you could see why it would have to be. But it seems ironic. It seems like a good idea. It's summer storm time and before the worst of the hurricane season. It's a good idea and probably means that storm season will be that much less catastrophic for the Dworkin branch of Kagro in the Morning World headquarters. So good news for later. We take some time off now. We lose time in order to gain time later on. So back to what Steve Fletcher, Minneapolis's Ward 3 council member, I guess, has to say. So that was the whole setup, that they have this particular problem with their local police union and police union representative, Bob Kroll. But he's very much like the representation you'll find elsewhere. We see it in New York all the time. And we recall seeing it in the last couple of years. It's been very evident. And it really doesn't matter even who the mayor is, unless you knuckle under to the police all the time, always, and are a Republican, they'll never leave you alone. It doesn't matter whether you knuckle under to them all the time as a Democrat. They'd prefer to have a Republican in office, thinking things will be better for them, even though they get the same answers sometimes out of Democrats when they pressure them. But I suppose they feel like they don't have to pressure Republicans and that they're naturally inclined to defer to the police in every case. Okay. Speaking of the point that Steve Fletcher was making, we have this comment here, or passing on a tweet. Our good friend Bobble Speak, who sends us a piece of his own, although, well, it's interesting. In reference to a tweet that is no longer available, apparently. But just saying, police unions almost never support other unions. And certainly, just passing on the note, essentially, that, that's something I've heard too. And it's easy to hear because it's true and there's lots of evidence of it. All right. Steve Fletcher, though, pointing out, as Greg read this one, politicians who cross the MPD find slowdowns in their wards. After the first time I cut money from the proposed police budget, and remember, we're all supposed to be cutting money and tightening our belts, and we're making hard choices and austerity, right? After first time I cut money from a proposed police budget, I had an uptick in calls taking forever, not an uptick in calls to him, but an uptick in calls taking forever to get a response. In other words, constituents were calling him saying, I've called the police to take care of this, that, or the other thing, and they don't come, and it takes hours, and I call and I say, what about sending police over here already? And what happens is the officers tell business owners and residents in that ward, hey, if you don't like the way it takes so long here, call your councilman and tell them. He cut our budget. We can't respond in time. The implication is supposed to be, in the minds of the constituents, that cutting our budget is what made it impossible for us to respond on time. But it's not. It is a intentional slowdown. And in other words, the police department is willing to not do their jobs in a very targeted fashion. They're willing to let residents and business owners in, let's say, Steve Fletcher's Ward 3 in Minneapolis suffer either without police services, or maybe from a higher crime rate, or getting no satisfaction when they call the police for the protection that they're paying for. And think about that, paying for protection. I mean, that's not out of keeping with what they're actually doing here. I mean, it's an apt description, but if it makes you think of a protection racket, maybe it should. Because this is kind of ridiculous, right? You know, everybody pays their taxes in order to get protected by the police, and the police are targeting people who didn't even do anything wrong. What they did wrong in the view of the police is vote for a person like Steve Fletcher, who might take money out of the budget that the police propose for themselves. We propose $1 million for body armor and free pizza for every cop who wants it. Well, free pizza, that just seems like an extravagance. The body armor is an extravagance, but I'm not willing to say so because politician, yada, yada, got to appear pro-police. That's what comes into play later. But right here, they're saying, we wanted the pizza. Well, if we don't get the pizza, your people don't get policing. And when we tell them to blame you for it, they will, because everybody believes the cops. Well, anyway, politicians who cross the MPD find slowdowns in their wards, is what he's saying. We pay dearly for public safety, he adds, $195 million a year, plus extensive and expensive legal settlements, right? $195 million a year just to operate the Minneapolis Police Department, apparently, and more off the top when they do dumb things like brutalize the citizenry and end up getting sued, and somebody has video and they can prove it, and a jury awards the victim millions of dollars in compensatory damages. Where does that come from? The cop doesn't pay it. The city does. So every dollar paid out in those settlements comes out of taxpayer hides. Don't you think they want to stop paying that premium on top of things that they have to pay just because their police officers feel like brutalizing people for whatever reason? Yeah, I think they have the right to be able to demand that not happen. And so does Steve Fletcher, and so do many other allies, and probably even some Republicans who you wouldn't consider to be allies. The problem is they can't make it happen. Why not? When they try, the problems just get worse, and they get worse in targeted ways. The politicians, the elected officials who say, I want to make it my business to stop this and put their minds to it and really pursue it, somehow they don't manage to stay elected officials for long enough to get the job done. Now, here we are, right? We paid dearly for public safety, $195 million plus extensive, expensive legal settlements. That should buy us more than a protection racket that'll take it out on our constituents if we try to create accountability. Everyone's supposed to agree that accountability is a positive force here. We try to create it, and look what happens. Many leaders before us have flinched. Looking at the steep consequences of this crisis, I think that is understandable, and I'm hoping that you'll understand it too. Doesn't mean you have to live with it forever. Doesn't mean you necessarily have to forgive it when you see it. You just need to understand it and then make your decisions, I think. But many leaders before us have flinched. Looking at the steep consequences of this crisis, I think that is understandable. The violence and destruction of this week is our worst fears realized, without laying the violence and destruction at anybody's feet in particular, but I think you get the idea of what he's thinking. But now we're here, and they can't threaten this anymore, right? Remember, the leverage that they have in Minneapolis and so many other places is, well, if you don't do things our way, we'll look the other direction, or we'll slow down work, and then, or we may even increase our own violence and also not arrest ourselves for it. But the point is, we won't do our jobs, and you'll all suffer for it. Well, now they can't threaten that anymore because we've seen the worst of what can happen already. They've already stopped doing their job. They've abandoned their posts in Minneapolis. They've been caught, of course, they've been caught on camera lashing out at people. They've been caught on camera with all sorts of unfair and illegal and unconstitutional practices. So there's not much more leverage to the threat, I guess. They can't threaten this anymore. It's happening now, and we're going to get through it, traumatized, suffering heavy losses, and permanently changed. But I guess we'll get through it. He continues here, the people they used to mobilize to come yell at us about how we needed more cops, well, those people are now either calling for structural change or they're staying extremely quiet, hoping things will go back to normal. Things aren't going back to normal. Maybe we're realizing that in more ways than one, with the pandemic looming over our heads. All of my colleagues got to where they are in different ways. Elected officials, that is. To varying degrees, we've all imagined that reform was possible, whether because incremental reform was what we actually wanted, or because reform was all that seemed politically possible. I've pretty consistently been on the front edge of the fight to give MPD less money and more accountability. To be clear, that front edge hasn't been especially radical. It's been the most we could find 7 votes for at the time, I guess that being a majority of the Minneapolis Council. For example, here's what I wrote last year during a summer when the Chamber of Commerce and the Downtown Council published a poll showing big support for hiring more cops. Compared to the demands in the streets today, it looks weak. And he attaches an opinion piece from the Star Tribune, editorial counterpoint. Minneapolis residents, let's open it up and see what the headline is anyway. Minneapolis residents have mixed views on policing. A desire for adding more officers is tempered by concerns over how the police department operates, right? In the face of what we're seeing today, of course, right? If that was hidden from your view before, you might have a different reaction. But if you're aware of it, or now you've become aware of it, Imagine coming to your local town council now and saying the police need more money, a bigger budget. And some people will understand it, or some people will actually even agree with it. And I'm sure the excuse will be, well, look what we have to handle, these big outbreaks of violence. Of course, now that we get video of it, and we're able to sit and review it and say, well, wait a second, you're the outbreak of violence. I don't understand. Why do I have to give you more money? Oh, well, we need better protective equipment. Officers are getting hurt out there. Officers are going crazy out there. And it's the equipment that we've given you to date that's made it possible for you to be so careless about violence. Back in the olden days when America was great or whatever, right? Cops were violent, it's true, but they weren't nearly as widely, systemically, and without consequences able to deal out such violence, because they didn't have, protective helmets and shields and shoulder pads and knee pads and shin pads and body armor and AR-15s and face shields and sound cannons and pepper spray and tear gas and rubber bullets, and it wasn't as widely available. And this is a problem we've discussed on the show a couple of times. It was one of the things that Armando was so surprised about. Actually, when we were at the 2012 convention in Charlotte, North Carolina, he hadn't, I guess, to that point encountered in person police in modern riot gear and how militarized it really was. And, that's come into fashion for criticism too. We need to burn it all down because Obama was a Democrat and he gave all kinds of military equipment to the police. And he did. There's no denying it. But again, as I was saying earlier, the fact that you voted for Obama or support Obama now or supported Obama then doesn't mean that you personally have to love the idea of a federal program distributing military surplus to police departments. Even if you actually did support it at the time, you can now change your mind. It's okay. You're welcome to do so. It's difficult to imagine, you would think, in the current situation, standing there and saying we need more money for more of these materials and more of these weapons, and having people say, yes, that is the correct answer. Of course, there are such people. I guess they're the ones like Bob Kroll and apparently like current president of the United States, who think, well, if we were just able to kill all the protesters or beat them so badly that they physically couldn't open their mouths and speak out or stand in the streets and be present, then we wouldn't have so much violence. If there were just more violence, there would be less violence, is of course what they're saying. And it's difficult to reconcile that at budget time or any other time. But anyway, you can take a look at the full argument as laid out in September of 2019 by Steve Fletcher. And I imagine it would be an interesting exploration. It's not even that long, but it's not the major point of what's going on here. We'll see whether, maybe during the break, I'll take a peek at it and see whether it's worth returning to. But he continues on. But that summer, less than a year ago, my advocacy prompted a series of attacks. Maybe it is worth reading it to see what would result in attacks. It's not that long, this editorial. Now I'm moved to do it here. Again, this is his editorial from September 2019. Hey, Minneapolis residents have mixed views on policing, Here illustrated by a photo of Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, F-R-E-Y, proposing adding a whopping 14 new police officers during his annual budget address. Far fewer, though, than what the city's police chief requested. I guess here you should note the dynamics. The police chief says, I don't know how many. We'll find out perhaps what number he asked for. The police chief, apparently, I can see it here without reading too closely, 250 additional officers. And they were like, we don't have the budget for that, and maybe it's not even a good idea. 14, I'm sure if you think 250 is necessary, 14 sounds like an insult, obviously. But remember again here, I guess we can borrow this excuse from Newt Gingrich, for whom it made a lot less sense here. But it's still like, well, we are adding police officers. We're not cutting them. But you guys treat it like it's a cut and go out and say, you know, these politicians are anti-cop. They're pro-criminal. Look what they're doing. They're cutting our request. Yeah, but they're increasing the number of cops. Yeah, but not enough. Yeah, but you have too many as it is. And this is the sort of thing that will result in vicious attacks. The Star Tribune editorial board, Fletcher wrote back in September of 2019, cited a study funded by the Downtown Council and the Minneapolis Regional Chamber of Commerce that was designed to show political support for an increase of 250 police officers to our sworn force. And the editorial board apparently did it under the headline of "Most in Minneapolis Want More Cops." And I guess he took issue with that. The editorial board closed with a criticism that some council members are listening to, quote, the loudest voices in the room, implying that an activist minority is having an outsized influence on policymakers, which is interesting. Because in that case, the minority and loudest voices in the room were people saying, maybe we don't need 250 cops. But what a terrible thing. As opposed to maybe the loudest voice in the room was the people saying that we do need that and not asking anybody in the neighborhood whether they agree. That narrative, he continues, dismisses not only those who speak up at council meetings, but also the hundreds of quieter conversations I have had with constituents in which even those who say they support adding officers also express concern about the way the department operates. In my experience, it is a mainstream view to want our police department to be better and not just bigger. Sounds familiar. More and better, right? I am on record supporting a higher number of police officers than we currently have. I voted in last year's budget process to approve a sworn force of 888 officers. For too much of the year, however, we have been below that number because of an unpopular truth. The way we manage police staffing in our city is badly broken. We need structural change in our police department to make it more effective at addressing our public safety needs. Staffing levels fluctuate widely throughout the year as we move recruits through a rigid 9-month academy and field training process that can produce 2 or maybe 3 classes a year. We cross our fingers and hope that each class includes enough new officers to fill the need when they graduate. During the last 2 years, through a combination of bad luck and bad planning, our active force has fallen significantly below our sworn complement at times as our recruit classes failed to keep up with attrition. At the time the chamber poll was conducted, the police department was significantly short of its authorized force, unless you count field trainees and recruits still in the academy. In that context, it's understandable that people saw a need to add new officers. The department is struggling to manage the flow of retirements, parental, medical, and military leaves, suspensions, and other forms of short-term attrition. If too many of these happen in one precinct on one shift, it puts significant strain on our system, and Minneapolis residents feel it. So just note, by the way, the tensions happening there. These guys are bad cops. We caught them on film. They have to be fired, suspended, investigated, something. Okay, we do it. Now we are X number of cops short in that precinct, and where are we going to get those people from? And then we start hearing complaints. There's not enough cops on the street. Crime is running rampant, and it's your fault. Why won't you give us more cops? Well, you can't just, snap your fingers, and you can't hire temp cops on the spot. Maybe that's something people need to look into, except that would create all problems of its own, of accountability to the local constituency. But, training cops, consider the weapons we give them and the authority we give them and the deference we give them. Those guys are going to require some serious training before they're put out on the street. And we rush it because we want to be able to respond and say, you asked for more cops and here they are. It's kind of a, catch-22, if you will. Anyway, right. So unfortunately, and perhaps most maddening, an inflexible police union contract leaves police leadership with a limited ability to move resources where they're needed to address short-term imbalances without a burdensome citywide bid process. This has at times left some shifts very short, which impacts our ability to respond promptly and puts a strain on our officers. We cover these gaps with overtime and rely on privately funded policing to smooth over our staffing gaps through buyback and off-duty arrangements. You see exactly what's going on here, right? You got to suspend these cops. They're out of control. All right, we will. We suspended these cops. Well, now we're 4 to 10 short in this shift. All right, well, we got cops over here and cops. Let's take one from here and one from there and one from there and put them over here to cover for the suspended cops, just so that we don't leave a shortage on the streets. At which point the cops say, hey, I like my comfortable beat where there's not that many problems, and I don't want to go to the tough one where people are angry at cops right now because you just had to suspend a couple of rogues. Or maybe not so much rogues as run-of-the-mill cops. Whatever your view is, they've been suspended and they need replacing. People are mad at cops in general. I don't want to go and do that thing. I've got a union. I'll use the grievance process to avoid being the one that's sent there. Well, what can we do? We respect unions and collective bargaining. Let's go through the process, and it's just going to take so long. Maybe we can get police recruits trained up and put there in enough, maybe that will alleviate the problem. I don't know. Maybe we can come up with one of these ridiculous public-private partnership arrangements, and now you're into the somewhat murky area of, like I say, having buybacks and off-duty arrangements and overtime pay and cops getting stressed by that, but enjoying the money for it and whatever. And that's another producer of bad outcomes, right? You overstress cops with additional overtime work, and eventually they're perhaps pushed to a breaking point that might have been there the whole time, whatever, but they're stressed beyond belief, and then they act out, and then they have to get suspended. All right, back to the op-ed here. Mayor Jacob Frey, still don't know exactly, I probably should look that up, has proposed 14 new officers in his recommended 2020 budget, and has expressed an intention to assign them in ways that may or may not be allowed by the current union contract, which, wouldn't stand in Trump's way, but here he's going to do it. He's a Democrat. That can't be done, right? While those assignments may seem politically popular today, they would not fix our broken staffing system. I'm hoping to work with the mayor and with Police Chief Medaria Arredondo to come up with proposals that would. Reasonable people can disagree about what the right police staffing level is. For example, I and other council members are interested in how we could respond to some calls for service differently. Sounds like he's gently dealing with the problem here, and in doing so, decrease the workload of the police department. Regardless, precinct inspectors need to be able to plan their shifts with greater staffing consistency. Watching our downtown precinct struggle with shortages in the heat of summer this year has been scary at times. They've managed it with overtime, with very hard work by the officers on duty, and yes, with degraded response times to some calls. When I express skepticism about the mayor's proposal to increase the police force without any systemic fixes, some people assume I am okay with this status quo. I am not. Officers and residents alike deserve better. We need to do the hard work to fix the police department's problems instead of relying on what polls tell. I intend to start by insisting that increased resources invested in the police department be accompanied by structural reforms that will increase the department's effectiveness and improve public safety outcomes. With both the budget and a new union contract to approve in the coming months, now is the time for our city to insist that we expect better before we fund more. Wow, that is eminently sensible, wouldn't you say? Well, picking back up with Steve Fletcher's Twitter thread from yesterday, that summer, less than a year ago, my advocacy, very reasonable advocacy, prompted a series of attacks, exemplified by a downtown business owner calling me, quote, more dangerous than the criminals for opposing increases. And he didn't oppose the increases. He only supported smaller increases. I referenced Newt Gingrich in this back in the days when he was taking over after his Republican Revolution and insisting that the cuts that he was proposing to various social programs weren't even cuts. Only in Washington, D.C. would we call this a cut because it was a reduction in the rate of increase. Similar tactic, I guess. of course, we were talking about reductions in the rate of increase of payments for life-supporting social safety net entitlement programs, as opposed to more weaponry and personnel for the police. Why do we need to spend more money on food and on nutritional support? Why spend more money for food for people when we could just spend less, or say increase the amount we're going to spend by a smaller amount? Well, is that amount smaller than the number of people we now have to support nutritionally? Yes. And so does that mean some of the people that we have to support will go without food? Yes. Well, then that's what the objection is, not the terminology. But anyway, let's see. I just wanted to clear up what that reference was. Steve Fletcher continues here. Right, so they were saying, I'm more dangerous than the criminals for opposing increases. I wasn't even proposing cuts. That conversation never changes. And then he includes here, for context, a YouTube clip from the 1970s about Hennepin Avenue there in Minneapolis, I guess. He doesn't clarify, but I guess that's probably it. Saying in which business owners in this clip call for more cops. In my entire lifetime, there's been a mainstream call for more cops downtown. That is what the people in the streets of Minneapolis have now changed. People got 4 officers immediately fired. People in the streets got Derek Chauvin charged, and his prosecution transferred to the Attorney General. It became clear by day 2 something was very different, and we'll talk about what that is after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And boy, we've spent a long time on this, but I think it's an extraordinarily important area for exploration. So as we left off before the break, Steve Fletcher was saying, so it became clear by day 2 of the current protests in Minneapolis, as well as elsewhere, I'm sure, that people were marching for much more than just getting these particular officers charged or prosecuted. The response to George Floyd's death needed to be much more than any prosecution could offer. What people in the streets have won is a permanent, well, we hope so, it may be a little premature to say so, but we hope they've won a permanent generational change to the mainstream view of policing. And it's a pervasive one, and it happens everywhere. I don't know yet, though several of us on the council are working on finding out what it would take to disband the MPD, the whole police department, and start fresh with a community-oriented, nonviolent public safety and outreach capacity. That does seem perhaps a little bit more radical in the approach, and radical in a good way. I mean, a lot of people will just, the word carries negative connotations and it shouldn't. But among us, I guess, we can, I think, understand what is meant here. But it's hard to imagine. And people think that the whole world would be thrown into chaos if we did this everywhere all at once. And maybe it would. Maybe it needs to be phased in gradually. Maybe we need to learn approaches and best practices to it by experimenting in 1 or 2 places at a time. And then you can execute it more widely. And it's not to say that there won't be somebody exercising some sort of policing powers in these places. It's just, it doesn't necessarily have to be done in what might be archaic formula, according to the archaic formula of hiring professional police forces that stand apart from everybody else and get funded in a way that's, different and weird and that can wield so much political influence, but we can still have accountability for public behavior, criminal behavior in this country. It doesn't necessarily have to be done with these old-style uniforms and these wacky old hats. Why do police wear those hats? What do they mean? They're just part of an old uniform. And we understand the badge part, but those wacky shape of a hat, what does that do for anybody? The blue uniform, I guess we've come to understand what that might mean. But certainly the militarized functions of things, so we've become too used to that. Maybe that could be worked out as well. I don't know exactly what the scope of his reform ideas are, but just many things about the way police do their work these days that we assume can't be done any other way suffers from a failure of imagination, I would say. Anyway, I don't know. He says maybe we could do something different. We're starting to talk. What would it take to disband the police department and start fresh with a community-oriented, nonviolent public safety and outreach capacity? Our city needs a public safety capacity that doesn't fear our residents, that doesn't need a gun at a community meeting, that considers itself part of our community, that doesn't resort quickly to pepper spray when people are understandably angry, that doesn't murder black men. We can totally reimagine what public safety means, what skills we're recruiting for, what tools we do and don't need. We can invest in cultural competency and mental health training, de-escalation and conflict resolution. We can send a city response that makes situations better. We can resolve confusion over a $20 grocery transaction without drawing a weapon or pulling out handcuffs. The whole world is watching, and we can declare policing as we know it a thing of the past and create a compassionate, nonviolent future. It will be hard, but so is managing a dysfunctional relationship with an unaccountable armed force in our city. Let's show the world what Minneapolis is made of. And it may be wishful thinking, but it's very important thinking, and prompted me to do a bit of thinking of my own back to, like I said, to my own experience with my dad. And if you didn't happen to catch that yesterday, I'll just, perhaps I'll just recount it by rereading what I put out there about it. It'll take me a minute to scroll back and find it, but that's probably the easiest way of of getting through this without trying to wing it all over again. But yes, here's the second time around for this thing. I was retweeting this thing because of how important it was to understanding why politicians have such a hard time holding police accountable. Elected officials who do it, who try to hold police accountable, well, they don't tend to remain elected officials long enough to see it through, and here's why. And I thought Steve Fletcher explained it pretty well, but in case you didn't get it in its entirety, I recount for you that, yes, my dad spent some time on the town council, and when he went to bat, does any of you remember the story? His story was he happened to be called upon by a constituent with a complaint about the way the local police were treating him. He went to bat, as I said, for a black man from the neighborhood who was followed by police all the way into his own driveway. And even then, once they got into the driveway, questioned about, what's your business, going into his own home. Sounds familiar. I mean, it wasn't a big shock. It wouldn't be a big shocker now. We hear all about it all the time. It was a very famous incident that led to the beer summit from out of the Cambridge Police Department, right? When a black Harvard professor, who now all I can remember is that his nickname was Skip, which was pretty amazing in itself, but that he, entering his own apartment, had the police called on him. And we see, dozens of these events now all the time. We're seeing this happen, but that was a big shocker to a lot of people who had never heard of such a thing happening before. How could it possibly be? There were a lot of people who were genuinely outraged on behalf of people who had been victimized by the police. But you remember what an uproar it caused when President Obama said, yeah, this is a stupid mistake that got made. And, oh, how dare you say cops are stupid? They were so venerated. That's part of what Fletcher's been talking about is that there's this ingrained idea that you have to be constantly falling all over yourself to thank cops for their service, like we do with members of the military who likewise aren't always right and sometimes make mistakes. But how dare you? They're out there fighting for your freedoms. Yeah, and they should do it correctly. The way we should all do our jobs correctly. And, who else? What else has been ingrained in us? Nobody's perfect. Yeah, we all learn to believe that too. So, and not to paint with a broad brush and to look at individuals on the individual level and judge people accordingly, whatever. But okay. But yeah, as it happens, some of the detail that I left out, it shouldn't matter. But as it happens, I believe they were following this guy because now he was, I think he was a relatively successful attorney and therefore a relatively moneyed individual, if not necessarily a privileged individual. But, and so it came to pass that he was able to drive and afford to drive a fancy automobile of the sort that the local constabulary thought, in their jaundiced and prejudiced, I should say, view of things, would ordinarily be beyond the means, let's say, of a gentleman of this complexion, and so it must be a stolen vehicle. No black man in this neighborhood or in this town would be able to comfortably drive a Mercedes-Benz or whatever. It wasn't like a Lamborghini or anything super flashy, but this must have been a stolen vehicle. There are plenty of such vehicles around here in this leafy suburb. He must have stolen it from one of our good white citizens and be on his way back to the dingy environs of the crime underworld of, let's say, Newark, New Jersey. We'll follow him and see where he's going, look for a pretext to pull him over, and investigate the situation and see which poor white person has been victimized and from whom this Mercedes was stolen. And they followed, and I think he was pretty aware of what was going on, and I guess didn't give them pretext to stop him before arriving at his equally beautiful and well-maintained home in the leafy suburbs. And so they followed him into the driveway. He must be here to rob this house or something of the sort, thinking he's throwing us off the scent by parking this fancy automobile outside of this beautiful house. We are supposed to assume, in his mind, he thinks he's fooled us into believing this is his home, when we know all he's doing is once we leave, saying, the car matches the home, we've made a mistake, and we turn around and leave, he'll then rob the place. But we're going to prevent that robbery from taking place as well as this obvious carjacking. We'll get around to finding out where the victim is lying, bleeding, having been robbed of his vehicle later. Well, it didn't go as planned for the police, of course, and luckily no violence ensued here, and he wasn't handcuffed or dragged away, I don't think. That's not my recollection. But this would have been in the late 80s, early 90s when this happened. So it's not like it was a new phenomenon then either, but we weren't yet up into the cell phone video camera age, and we were still stuck in the late part of the nobody ever believes us because there's never video stage. And anyway, he quite rightly complained, and he complained to his most local town council person. That ended up being my dad, who he may have known because they were both attorneys, and my dad had a long career as a public defender, and then even for years afterwards just did private criminal defense work. That was always his specialty. And guess what happened? He picked up the case on the part of the constituent service case. The cops did me wrong. What are you going to do about it? So he did what you're supposed to do about it, but which other politicians, more experienced politicians who've run into this problem before and survived, know you're not supposed to do. He went to the town council and said, we have a problem with the way our small leafy burb is doing its policing. How do you know? Well, here's the case. A well-to-do gentleman in our neighborhood was followed, and he told the story. And, essentially, I guess at some point they called a representative of the police department in to answer for this, whether it was the chief of police or some underling, I don't remember. I don't think they called the cops who responded to this, or who, I guess, made their own call here and followed this guy. I don't think they called them necessarily out in front of the council, but they were appalled at, how this could be, this was taking shape. A council member who could threaten their jobs and their budget, if he could find the support for doing it, was questioning their policing methods and their professional demeanor. And you know what that means. This was a well-practiced thing for them, but I guess it wasn't, not for my dad, not from a political elected official's perspective. It was something he came up against in court all the time, but there's some measure of protection there, and that it's expected from defense attorneys. Although I do believe that police all over the country, especially in smaller towns where they can more easily identify and pick out the defense attorneys that might make them look foolish or cost them their credibility or their case, and take revenge for that in other small ways. But, he was basically able to say in the meeting, look, this shouldn't have happened and we got to do something about it. And the police denied that it happened, or told a different story, or he had a taillight out, or he matched the description of somebody wanted in a burglary. The Mercedes driving burglar, whatever it was. And, my dad didn't stand for it for very long. I've heard these stories before. Oh, he matched the description of this, or he failed to make a turn signal at some point, or whatever. Or they just give a totally different story of how it happened, and he was abusive to them, and that's why it happened. But we all know, look, sometimes the police, they don't always tell the truth about everything when they're on the spot having to answer for their behavior. And they were astonished. How dare you, cops? Can't believe you said that sometimes cops don't tell the truth. And I guess that was his first inkling that, he'd seen that in court before, but his first inkling of how this could explode. Because pretty soon after, we then began to see local cops around the house all the time, or at least that was the report. I wasn't living at home at the time. Like I said, I was away at college or living on my own post-college in the early 90s, and we started to hear about this. My brothers, younger brothers, were then growing up. So I guess the older of my two youngest, who were still at home, was at that point licensed to drive, and enjoyed doing so, and bought himself a nice little car and everything, and was driving around town, and noticed that every time he left the house, the cops were following him to see if he was, I guess, signaling correctly in all of his turns. He probably got pulled over once or twice too, but he was, white kid of a local politician. It's not like they dragged him out and beat him up. They just made it known that they were out there making it a pain in the ass for him to drive his nice new car around. Things like that. The town has an ordinance against, in residential neighborhoods, parking cars out on the curb. In residential neighborhoods in this suburban area, you have to put your cars away in the garage or in your driveway. And if you leave them out curbside after, midnight or something like that, you can get ticketed. And guess what? So, overnight visitors, including me, had to be warned all the time, because the cops would come around looking for people to give tickets to outside of Councilman Waldman's house, because it was a freebie, and the chiefs would love you for it. So it was that. It was setting up speed traps all over the neighborhood, and people would complain and call the police and say, 6 days in a row you've had a speed trap on my stupid little neighborhood road. What's going on here? What are you looking for? And they would say, ask Councilman Waldman why we're doing that. Ask Councilman Waldman why we're giving everybody tickets for taillights being out, or inspection stickers being late, or what have you. All, legit infractions perhaps, but things they should otherwise would have been happy to ignore, because they're out there actually patrolling for, serious issues. or making some serious issues up if they can. But it became a pain in the ass, a hazard, and the cost of doing business for everybody else in the neighborhood, who then started saying, essentially, well, what are you giving the police such a hard time for? Why don't you back up? Well, one of your neighbors got harassed, very much unjustifiably, and they lied about it. Yeah, well, now it's causing me problems. Let it just be the neighbor's problem. And people were willing to do that. And it didn't stop there. And of course, once campaign time, re-election time came, whereas you might have had this one victim of the police abuse, not brutality, but abuse here, supporting the one politician who would go to bat for him. And maybe he told others, and maybe the entire black community of our small town felt the same way if they were aware of the problem. But in the meantime, the police spent their time trying to make everyone aware come re-election time that this one particular councilman was not to be trusted, shouldn't be re-elected. He's an enemy of cops, and everybody knows cops are the good guys. He's pro-criminal, in fact. Did you know he was a public defender? He made a career of getting murderers and rapists out of jail. And in fact, that's what he wants for this town. He wants to make our town safe, but not for you, for the criminals. He wants your daughters raped. That's who we're talking about. You can't return him to the town council. That would be crazy. And, for the most part, it worked. Not that everybody came to believe those sorts of things about my dad. But by the way, imagine having to see that sort of thing about your dad, who's been scrupulously honest about all of his dealings in government because he ran as a big reformer, and he only ran reluctantly as a big reformer. He didn't really want to be doing this. It was just, hey, things in our small leafy suburb are going wrong, and I'd like to be there to try and set them right. And then an injustice happened, and I wanted to set that right, and instead we have this, what became the politics of personal destruction later on, practiced right in front of me. And it didn't shake me at all. I didn't say, what if he is pro-murder and pro-rape? It never occurred to me that was the case, and it probably didn't really believe it among the constituency either. But it worked well enough. And so the job of reforming the police department was never completed, and no one else wanted to take it up. So that's the whole thing in microcosm anyway. I see Steve Fletcher has had the same problem, and you've probably seen it elsewhere in other cities. And as a matter of fact, Karen says here in her comments to me, since Freddie Gray and the uprising in the wake of his death at the hands of Baltimore's police department, Baltimore has in fact, or at least people have suspected that this is the case, conducted a massive citywide slowdown, and our homicide rate has soared as a result. So, just people getting murdered and families grieving because police were upset that they got caught out last time, because we're living in a video era and people want to hold the police accountable because the proof is there. There's a fairly strong local belief, she continues, that police were involved, by the way, in looting during, I guess, recent unrest, and reselling drugs stolen during the looting. Did they loot some, did they loot like pharmacy? Are we talking about pharmacy grade stuff that they were selling? What are they selling? Let me know. We need to find out. But yeah, it's generally a systemic and nationwide lack of accountability for police on a number of fronts. They count on being able to trade on the reputation of being above suspicion in some cases, and where that doesn't work, they simply say, okay, so you've caught us dead to rights, but we're going to make your lives miserable unless you cave to us. That's the protection racket that he's talking about. Fletcher. All right. Well, anyway, we've spent more than enough time on it, I guess, even though it's an extraordinarily important topic. There's lots of other things happening here. We'll just have to do sort of lightning round about what some of those things are. I'll note for the record, having seen the tweet from CNN Politics, that Ferguson, Missouri, a flashpoint in all of the last couple of years of backlash against police brutality and abuse. Ferguson, Missouri elects its first black mayor in the city's history. And I think we spent some time back around then recounting how it was that majority black jurisdictions in the area came to have such difficulty electing black representation for them among their elected officials. So congratulations there. Not only their first black mayor, but a black woman. And we should probably click through so that we can give you her name, because it always rankles, and rightly so, when we just say, well, she's black and she's a woman, and that's all that we need to know. We are probably would do well to point out. Her name is Ella Jones. This woman, who is the first African-American and first woman, there's never even been a white woman, first woman elected mayor of Ferguson, Missouri. So congratulations there. Yes, lots of voting activity going on yesterday, including voting going on inside D.C. yesterday, and the polls apparently closed after the time imposed as a curfew. And even though all the bases were covered and they tried to say, well, voting is exempt from the curfew, leave it to the cops on the ground not to have noticed that little technicality, and apparently were rousting people who were still waiting in line to cast their votes and telling them they had to go home because curfew. And as people shouted back, no, there's an exemption for voting. Well, it's only a workable exemption if the police are willing to acknowledge that they've heard that there is such an exemption. And if they're not, well, tell it to the judge. And you can indeed tell it to the judge, but in the meantime, you haven't had a chance to cast your vote. But leave it to D.C. Under Donald Trump to have somehow, screwed that up. All right, let's see. Lots more stemming from all this, and gosh, I don't even know how to get to what else is important. I think here, we'll drop it on this one. We've only got a few minutes left. BuzzFeed News has what appears to be an important story, I guess, accompanying the armed police forces from the various federal agencies who are now showing up in D.C. and making ridiculous shows of force. I happened to see retweeted this morning that Bureau of Prisons folks had set up some sort of blockade on what looked to be maybe 16th Street Northwest in D.C. Several blocks, it looked like, north of the White House. So now the White House perimeter has expanded to like 3-4 blocks in every direction. There were the cops in full riot gear and military regalia blocking the street at 7:30 in the morning. There were no demonstrators anywhere in any direction that could be seen, but there they were, looking strong and very strongly powerful for the president for another photo opportunity. But there are in fact several bureaus and departments that you would think don't have a police force necessarily actually sometimes do, and apparently they were all being deputized to patrol, or rather to be photographed patrolling or setting up roadblocks in D.C. to demonstrate the very strongly powerful military occupation ordered by Donald Trump. He has had great legal difficulty ordering military occupations in other cities and other states, but the federal enclave of Washington, D.C. falls arguably more directly under his control. So everybody who's there's Department of Commerce has got cops. There's Department of Agriculture cops. They're deputized. They have badges. They're even authorized to carry weapons. And I guess if you dress them up enough, they'll look like military occupiers if you order them to do so. But alongside that, the story in BuzzFeed from Jason Leopold and Anthony Cormier, who report the DEA, which definitely has cops and guns. The DEA, though, has been given permission to investigate what? Drugs, right? No. Investigate people protesting George Floyd's death because, I don't know, you must be on drugs if you're doing that, I guess. The Justice Department gave the agency the temporary power to enforce any federal crime, not just drug crimes, but any federal crime committed as a result of the protests over the death of George Floyd. I wonder how they think they're going to get to that. I guess they don't really care. The DEA, it says, has been granted sweeping new authority to conduct covert surveillance and collect intelligence on people participating in protests over the police killing of George Floyd, according to a 2-page memorandum obtained by BuzzFeed News. Floyd's death has spawned widespread protests across the nation. You know about that. which the memo says have sometimes included violence and looting. Not sure where it all comes from, but it includes it. Police agencies in certain areas of the country have struggled to maintain and or restore order. The memo requests the extraordinary powers on a temporary basis. I'm sure they'll give them right back. And on Sunday afternoon, a senior Justice Department official signed off. Attorney General William Barr issued a statement Saturday following a night of widespread violence, mostly his fault. But it happened, and of course, without providing any evidence, he blames it all on anarchistic and far-left extremists using Antifa-like tactics, blamed for the unrest. And he said the FBI, DEA, U.S. Marshals, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, which conservatives used to hate with the passion of 1,000, or the heat of 1,000 suns. I don't know, did suns have passion? I guess they could. Anyway, but now they'll all be deployed in D.C. to support local efforts to enforce federal law, which is now an awesome thing. And all the conservatives who were screaming, tyranny, I can't get a haircut, now find the hated BATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and Explosives, they added that, patrolling the streets of D.C., and it's a good thing because they're there to beat down the people we don't like as opposed to us, which will come in time. But when they do, then they'll be tyrants again. Anyway, interesting, I thought. Just sort of unchecked surveillance, warrantless surveillance against American citizens with next to zero accountability. That was, by the way, connecting it to some other stories, reasons why all the charges were supposed to have been dismissed against Mike Flynn, who actually is a spy. Unchecked, warrantless domestic surveillance. But that kind bad, this kind good. We'll straighten that out, I hope, in the days to come, or at least get to the story behind it. In the meantime, time to hand the microphone over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and I bet he'll have some of this on his plate as well. Heavy criticism, among other things, he has to report here, continuing over Trump's hazy idea to use the military on U.S. soil. Maybe we'll clear some of it up. And look at this. A Virginia Republican gubernatorial candidate has done something stupid. Let's find out what it is.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
I found out he's telling gun owners that they should be ready to shoot anti-fascist protesters. Hooray! Also, White House operatives have begun viciously attacking religious leaders who criticized Trump's tear gas lighting. That's like tear gas lighting photo op. And more word from Minneapolis as well, plus around the world. Next.